Good morning, Grace family. This is Pastor Jim. It's good to be with you here on Sunday, July 19th. This short video is a reading of our summer story passage, Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 52. And I'm going to read that passage for us. Hopefully, you have read this, and then you have prayerfully listened to the songs that we provided that are centered around the theme, Is Jesus Our Satisfaction? There's a prayer there for you to read and just tune your heart to thinking about Christ. And then now as we read this passage together, we'll read it and I'll offer a few comments and a few questions, things for us to think about and meditate on, and questions and things that we will meditate on all week. You will receive a handout that will give you a guide for Monday through Saturday of reading and meditation in preparation for our preaching on this passage next Sunday. So as I read this passage, I'm going to read Mark 6, 30 to 52. In verses 30 to 34, we have an introduction where we'll introduce just a couple themes. Then 35 to 44, we have the miracle of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And then in 45 to 52, we have the application of that miracle to the disciples in the story where they're in the storm on the sea. So let's jump in. We'll make a few comments along the way. Beginning at verse 30, the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. This is one of the few places in Mark where the 12 disciples are called the apostles, which means the sent ones, because Jesus had sent them out on a journey earlier in the chapter. He had sent them out two by two to heal diseases, cast out unclean spirits, preach the good news that the kingdom is here. And before Mark tells us that they came back to Jesus, he includes the story of the beheading of John the Baptist so that the readers begin to see that Mark is trying to tell us being sent on a mission for Jesus and living for Jesus is connected to suffering. It was for Jesus on the cross. It was for the disciples. 11 of the 12 are going to be martyred. It is for many of his followers. So they return and tell Jesus how their trip went and what went on. Verse 31, he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. Now, a lot of times when you would get in a boat and sail to a desolate place on the Sea of Galilee, it would be going up the shoreline to another spot. We're not quite sure where this is, but it appears to be a desolate, desert-like place. But unfortunately, towns around, people are able to see where they're going or know they're going for. There's a fervor as miracles have occurred, and so there's an attraction of wanting to follow them, and many of them race up the shoreline, come from the different towns, meet them there. There's a real fervor here. There's 5,000 men plus women and children, according to Mark and Matthew. But Mark has introduced a couple themes for us to think about. One, the disciples are being invited away to get alone with Jesus for some rest. Now, the theme of rest in the scripture is a rich theme. It's a theme of God providing rest for his people. And rest even is pictured as salvation. So think about Jesus calling the disciples together for rest. That's what this story is about. Although it doesn't appear they're going to get much rest, it is what Jesus called them apart to do. Secondly, we're introduced to Jesus as a compassionate shepherd. It said when he saw the crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, which really is a metaphor to say here was a group of people with a mission, wanting to accomplish something, and they had no one to lead them. When Moses found out he wasn't going to get to go to the promised land, he prayed to the Lord that God would not leave the people of Israel without a leader, without someone to lead them into the promised land and conquer the land. He didn't want them to be, as Moses said, sheep without a shepherd. So this is an image of someone. Jesus sees this crowd as really wanting to accomplish something. They're on a mission, but they have no leader. So that's what this story is about. And let's continue reading. So when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves, so they can buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." Now, they interrupted Jesus' teaching. It's a great sermon, Jesus. We love what you're teaching. We should let them go and get some food. And Jesus creates a crisis for them. He just looks at them and says, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And we might ponder, why does Jesus put this back on them? Why is Jesus putting on them the pressure to feed these people when he knows they can't and they know they can't? Verse 38, he said to them, "Well, how many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to all sit down in groups on the green grass. And notice, even though it was a desolate place, there was some grass. And this green grass is even suggestive of Mark that what is happening here in the desert is this is turning into a rich banquet and green pastures of Jesus providing for his people. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Notice how many baskets they picked up. Notice they all ate and were satisfied. So Mark has several themes going on here. Who Jesus is, what he provides for the crowd in the desert, and what he's teaching his disciples as he brought them aside to give them rest. And instead of them getting rest, he turned up the ante on them and had them try to do something they couldn't do. And they met the need. So we'll be thinking on those themes and meditating on those together. Let's continue reading in verse 45. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. About the 4th watch of the night. Now, this 4th watch is between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So Jesus has let them struggle in the wind on the sea for quite some time while he was alone on the land. He left them in the storm for quite a while before he came. Ponder that. And about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. Now, that's an odd way of saying, as though he were going to walk by them. But he's walking by. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I." This phrase, "it is I am," is reminiscent of the phrase that God gave to Moses in the wilderness when he said, "I am is the one speaking to you. Take heart, it is I am. Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And then listen to Mark's comment. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Now notice, Mark makes no comment about the miracle of the story of Jesus walking on the water. No comment about the miracle of the story of Jesus calming the waves. What we're told is the moment Jesus got into the boat and was with them, the storm ceased. But what Mark wants us to notice is he wants us to notice Mark's commentary about the disciples. They were utterly astounded. Now, this astounding is not a word that refers to being astonished in a awe, worshipful wonder way. It is utterly astounded. It is shocked and surprised to a point of not understanding and disbelief. It is as if it's even the word that's used for someone that is so astounded and shocked that they are mentally struggling to be sane. In other words, the disciples were in complete shock at what was happening because they couldn't believe it. It just wasn't real to them. They were struggling to grasp it. Why? Why were they struggling to grasp what happened? Because they did not understand about the loaves. You see, what happens in the boat is all about the loaves. It's about the miracle of the loaves. This will be one of 3 times that Jesus asked the disciples in Mark, don't you get the story of the loaves? And this story of the loaves is the only story that's in all 4 Gospels. So it's a significant story. And they didn't get what Jesus was teaching them in the loaves. So whatever he was teaching them in the loaves, it was to make a difference in what happened in the storm on the sea. They had saw the miracle and missed it because they just couldn't grab it. Why? Because their hearts were dull and hard. Faith is not just seeing what happens, but it's having a heart to understand the glory of what is going on. And just like the disciples could have missed it, so can we. We can read the miracle, we can read how it happens, and we can miss the glory of who Jesus is and what he wants to do in our lives. So this week, each day we're going to read Mark 30 to 52 twice, morning and evening. And then we're going to reread a section of it, just sometimes the intro, the miracle, or the application. And I'll provide some questions for you to meditate on and pray on along with a song and a prayer. And this will allow us to think about this story and then come back next week on Sunday and worship together and worship together on Mark 6:30 to 52. Thank you.